Hi guys, this is Max here with hopefully another great political video, and today we're going to make something a little bit different. We are going to take a look at the United States presidents. That's right, we're going to rank every single American president from George Washington to Joseph R. Biden. Is Joseph R. Biden here on the list? No, actually he isn't. Okay, well then we'll just rank everyone from George Washington all the way to Donald John Trump. Now, whom do we start with? Well, they're all mixed up, so I assume Bush will be first. Now, where are we going to put George Bush? Now, on the one hand, he passed the Patriot Act, bad law that stripped Americans of their civil liberties. On the other hand, at least early on, he showed great leadership in the wake of 9/11. But, yeah, he didn't do anything really outstanding, even though he's a very nice guy. And he mostly led in fear, rather than leading in out of reason, and that's the reason why he's a D. Now, James Buchanan, yeah, worst president out of all the U.S. presidents, worst president ever. He goes into the F tier. Now, let's see where Jimmy Carter goes, and I can't really think of a single good thing that happened during Carter's presidency. I mean, of course, you can't blame him for everything that happened. You can't blame him for the Iranian hostage crisis, at least not only him. You can't blame him for the fuel crisis. But on the other hand, in a certain way, presidents are responsible for what happened during their time in office. And during Jimmy Carter's time, the USA just wasn't doing very good. So, as of right now, I think he's a D. Now, Chester A. Arthur is one of the easily overlooked presidents in U.S. history. He took over following Garfield's assassination. I think Garfield would have been a lot better, but in the end, I believe I'd put him into the C tier, simply because he didn't do enough that it would have made a major difference in U.S. history. Grover Cleveland. Now, where does Cleveland go? Now, he was a Democratic president in a time where there were almost only Republican presidents in America. Grover Cleveland was highly intelligent. Under him, the country was doing very, very well, and I believe he always tried to do the best he could, and he was in touch with the American people. He did whatever they thought was popular, and so I actually believe that it's too much to say that he's an A tier, but I believe I can put him down here at B, which is a decent achievement for 2 non-consecutive terms in office. Bill Clinton, I don't know. I mean, the economy was doing well. I don't really care about his sex scandals. Yeah, well, yeah, I believe we could put him as a B tier, because the 90s were a good time in general. And again, of course, presidents are not entirely responsible for everything bad and good that happens during their time in office, but they're somewhat responsible for it, at least in the way that they didn't mess it up when it went well, and in the way that they didn't make it a whole lot better when it went poorly. So, he's a B. Calvin Coolidge, the only president from my home state of Vermont, I believe he's an A-tier president. He's not an S-tier president, but he was the type of person you'd want there, to be in Washington, D.C., doing actually not all that much, because he became famous not through his actions as president, but through his inactions. He was probably the least selfish out of all presidents. He was the only president I could think of in a very, very long time who actually tried to shrink the power of his own office. He thought the president's power should be limited. He did not try to consolidate more and more power within his own persona, like, for example, Bush did, or Woodrow Wilson. He was not egocentrical, and that's what makes up a great leader. Now, Herbert Hoover is an F tier. I'm sorry, Herbert. Now, obviously, you can't blame him alone for what happened for the Great Depression. It just coincidentally happened to crash during his presidency, but he could have tried to do things better. I mean, he signed a the Smoot-Hawley tariff. He raised taxes and he bailed out big business, and it just wasn't a good policy approach. And after he left office, America was in one of the worst crises of its entire history, probably the worst crisis, at least economically speaking. Yeah, so I'm sorry, Herbert. I really like to put you in the D tier because, somewhat like Bush, he did have a very impressive personal upbringing. He grew up extremely poorly and he was a self made man. So, at least from that viewpoint, Herbert Hoover, a really good guy. William Henry Harrison goes to C because he didn't even ever get assigned an executive order. He just lived for a month. And also, there's this thing called the Curse of Tippecanoe. It's really interesting. Maybe that's the reason why he died so early. Please look it up. It's really cool. Curse of Tippecanoe. Now, Dwight the Eisenhower, I don't know. I mean, the 50s, yeah, he was really anti-communist, which is good. But on the other hand, he, like, I don't know. I believe his foreign policy was bad in the way that we overthrew a democratically elected government in Iran, which indirectly led to the Islamic State of Iran that we have today, that we're enemies with. And he also told Turkey to invade northern Cyprus. But overall, he had a solid presidency. Because of these foreign policy incidents, I'm not going to put him at A, but I believe he's a solid B. William Howard Taft. Now, he's the fattest out of all presidents. In fact, there's a story where he went into the bath in a bathtub in a hotel in New Jersey, and all the bath water spilled over, so it was dripping from the roof in the flow below him. Yeah, anyway, that's funny. But in general, I think that Taft is a B. I mean, or you already could say a C, because not really too much happened during his presidency. In many ways, he continued the legacy of Teddy Roosevelt, but in some other ways, he did his own stuff. Yeah, he's not insignificant, but I believe in general he's a B. Or a C. He's a C. Now, Millard Fillmore, I'm not really too impressed by him. Like many of these pre-Civil War presidents, they didn't really do a whole lot to keep the country together. He didn't have any major screw-ups, but that doesn't mean he's a very good president. Now, actually, I'm going to put Taft as a B, because even though he was not the best president, he didn't do anything outstanding, he still had pretty good ideological beliefs in my viewpoint. Now, Gerald Ford, I believe Gerald Ford is he's a C. Now, or I could put him as a D, but I think that he was a solid president. The only reason why I'll actually put him as a D. The reason why he's all the way down there is because of, you guessed it, the Nixon pardon, which was heavily corrupted and totally unjustified. So, Gerald Ford is a D. Now, Ulysses S Grant was pretty corrupt, was a whiskey guy, and yeah, but he was a solid president. He pushed for civil rights for African Americans. He was somebody who cared about Reconstruction. That's the reason why he's up there in the B tier. Warren J. Harding never did anything as president, heavily corrupted, was dumb as shit, so he's an F. Rutherford B.A. I'll put Rutherford B.A. as a D tier, because he did something very, 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 very dishonorable. He lost an election, he actually lost it, and then he claimed voter fraud, and Congress ended up creating a committee that elevated him to the office of president. So they basically declared him the winner because of disputed electoral votes. And that is really disgraceful. I mean, he should have accepted the fact that he didn't win an election. Yeah. I mean, I don't like Rutherford B. Hayes. I'd actually go as far as putting him in the F tier, but he didn't have any big screw-ups as president, so he's down there in D. Andrew Jackson, I actually think very good of Andrew Jackson. but then there are some other things that would make me think that he wasn't as perfect. But I'll put him in the B tier, or actually, I'll put him in the A tier. Now, of course, this is a very disputed move. I know Andrew Jackson was exceptionally racist for today's standards and even overtly racist for his time. But the reason why he's up there is because he was the first common man president. He believed into the small guy making decisions for themselves. He believed that politicians should be accountable to the people and not the people to the politicians. Of course, by today's standards, he had many outdated views, but he was the guy who brought the ball rolling. It's probably because of him that states dropped their property requirements, and that, for voting, that is, and it is because of him that a new movement arose that saw ordinary people reaching a stronger amount of importance. Now, obviously, apart from that, he also did the Indian Removal Act, which is very bad. It's a pretty shameful chapter in American history. But that wasn't him alone, and he also caused the banking crisis. That wasn't his intent, but it did happen under his presidency. Also, though, even though he was a slave owner and a Southerner himself, and I believe that's ultimately the reason why he's up there at A tier, even though he was a slave owner and a Southerner, he aggressively went after South Carolina when they violated federal law and tried to basically do their own thing. So, you can't accuse him of being like a secessionist. He was a unionist. He believed in America. He believed in true democracy, and that's the reason why he's an A tier. Now, somebody who's not an A tier but a B, or I could put him as an A. Yeah, I could put Thomas Jefferson as an A or as a B, because what I didn't like about his presidency is that he sometimes made brash decisions that didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So he's not an S tier, but he's in the A tier. The one decision that I really struggled with that Jefferson made was that he blocked trade, or that he banned trade during the Napoleonic Wars, severely damaging the economy. But he also stood up to pirates abroad. He fought the first American foreign war. And he was somebody that was very freedom loving, and he's up there in A. Now, John Adams is a D or an F tier. I don't know. I don't like him. He's like the complete opposite of Thomas Jefferson. In fact, there was lots of trash talking when they campaigned against each other for president. That happened 2 times. And the reason why John Adams is all the way down there in D is because of the Alien and Sedition Act. He tried to crack down on freedom of speech against the government. Yeah, he's actually an F tier. So he was not a good president. But he was a good founding father. He just, afterwards, him and the Federalist Party, they pushed for pretty crappy policies. Andrew Johnson, F tier. Andrew Johnson is a disgusting guy. I mean, he tried to manage Reconstruction in a way that would benefit the South, in the way that they would not have to punish former Confederates. But actually, that was, it's often overlooked that this was also Lincoln's plan. So putting him all the way down in the F tier would be a bit unfair. I believe D is appropriate, but you're right. You're right when you hate him. I mean, you have every right to do so. Now, JFK, I don't know. Could put him as a D tier president, could put him as a C. But first of all, I want you to know that I'm not as big of a fan of JFK as many other people are. He's overrated because of his early death. And also, like, JFK's biggest issue is that he caused the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he also rolled back on Eisenhower's idea to send troops into Laos and Cambodia early on in the Vietnam War, which would have ended it pretty quickly. And I believe if we had done that, the whole Vietnam War would have ended in a peace deal early on, and also in the South surviving. And again, he caused the Cuban Missile Crisis for screwing up the Bay of Pigs invasion, so JFK is a D-tier president. Now, James Garfield is an A. Now, or at least a B, because he wasn't in office for too long, but ideologically speaking, he was great. He appointed African American cabinet ministers, and he really took Reconstruction serious. He was very smart, and because he was a teacher, he also had a focus on making education in the United States better. It would have been really, really great to see him be in office there a little bit longer. Now, LBJ, where do we put him? Now, he did stay in the course during the Vietnam War. That was a very difficult time. He pushed through the Great Society reforms, well, which ended up giving lots of people help. And yeah, in general, he was a very solid guy. And I don't know whether to put him at A tier or at B tier, but even though he was good as president, he wasn't necessarily outstanding. So that's where he is in the B tier. Now, Abraham Lincoln, and here we have our first S tier president, you could say. Maybe you could say A, but actually he's S tier. Because the Civil War was an extremely difficult time in American history. There were so many occasions where the Confederacy was at the brink of winning, at the brink of breaking off, and without trying to offend any Southerners, secession is a bad thing, and Lincoln weathered that storm. He stood tall because he was very tall, and he really saved this nation. So lots of credit needs to be given to him for that. Now, let's go to Benjamin Harrison. Really insignificant. Not a nice guy, raised tariffs, but in general, yeah, there's nothing too big or too bad or too good that happened while he was president, so he's there. That has nothing to do with the tariffs, by the way. He's just not an important guy. James Madison, no, James Madison, not an S tier, A tier, B tier, I don't know. Well, James Madison was a good president. He was not outstanding, but while he was in office, he was a pragmatist. He tried to work with people of all different political backgrounds, and he passed many laws that were good for the United States and was overall a decent guy. So he's a B tier. William McKinley. Now, he oversaw the United States entry into the world stage as a major power. He did fight some questionable wars that led to lots of deaths, but I believe you could say that he was very decent. Yeah, he was good, but he wasn't perfect. So, yeah, I believe he's a B tier. James Monroe, though. James Monroe is definitely an A tier president, and that's because of something called the Era of Good Feelings, which was the last time where everybody in America actually got along. I mean, politically speaking. He united the Federalists, who were the Northern or Northeastern Party, and the Democratic Republicans, that were the more rural party, and that what he was a part of. And America was extremely rich during his time in office, and he was extremely undisputed. He was very, very popular, and that creating that sense of unity is really, really, really incredible. And this is the reason why I give him an A tier. Now, Nixon is a D tier president. I mean, number one, because of the war on drugs, very destructive, and he also put in place some economic controls by the government that ended up greatly hurting the economy, so he's a D tier president. Now, Barack Obama. This is where it gets difficult, because now we get something called recency bias. We all have biased views of our more recent politicians, but I think in general Obama is a C tier president. Because even though he kind of was the first black president, I wouldn't really count this as much of an achievement. I mean, he just has the skin color he has. And also, the Obamacare law was something that tried to help many Americans get covered, but it also ended up raising healthcare costs, so I don't really think that was a good plan. And he he did try to end the Great Recession with economic policies by the government, but they were not very effective, and in the end, things would have went the exact same way even without him in office. So, yeah, I believe he's a C tier. Probably less significant, less bad than most Republicans think he is, less important than most Democrats think he is. Obama gets into the C tier. George H.W. Bush, yeah, so he actually raised taxes so he could go to war in the Middle East. And I get why he went to war there, but the I don't like the fact that he just expanded the size of the government by his own hands in such a way. But overall, he was a nice guy. So he was a guy with the heart at the right place, but sometimes made decisions that were just wrong. I mean, that's the way how you need to say it. Now, Franklin Pierce is an F tier president. He didn't really try anything to keep the country together. He did have a very tragic personal life. He lost his daughter and his wife shortly before he entered office. But that doesn't justify him being a bad guy. I mean, if it really was so traumatic for him, he should have not taken office. So, F tier for Franklin Pierce. Now, FDR, where do I put F? Now, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, I think he should be up there in the B tier, because even though he showed great leadership during World War II, was a very responsible leader, the one bad thing about his presidency is that he did actually terminate many Japanese Americans that were U.S. citizens. And also his New Deal, even though it ended up giving lots of people help, failed to address the underlying economic issues that plagued America during that time period. Just like Herbert Hoover, his interventionist type of the government basically micromanaging the economy was just not a good one. But because he showed such great leadership during World War II, he's still a B tier. Now, James K. Polk, heavily underrated president, the opposite of JFK. He expanded the United States territory by a third. He got Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. He got us all of that land. He got us Texas and California, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, all of the American West. That's because of him. Lots of credit needs to be given to him. Now, John Quincy Adams. This is a guy with whom I really struggle. Because on the one hand, he was ahead of his time in many ways, like on issues like slavery and everything. And he also wanted America to be industrialized. However, he was also quite an elitist. And he kind of represented the opposite of Andrew Jackson, who wanted a more bottom-up government. John Quincy Adams wanted a top-down government. And so he's a C-tier president. Even though I really have parts of him that I like. He's a controversial guy in my eyes. Now, Ronald Reagan. I think Ronald Reagan's a B. Because he actually oversaw a time of relative economic growth, and everybody in the world got to respect the United States a little bit more. Also, the Soviet Union was on its decline. Reagan did a really good and solid job. He wasn't really able to raise wages for American workers, but lots of the wealth that ended up being acquired by the rich did trickle down. So, in that ways, Ronald Reagan, really good president. I could actually go as far as putting him up here in the A tier, but I believe the A tier is more like for presidents that were just, dang dude, really good, and the S tier is, of course, for the great American heroes. Now, Zachary Taylor, a C tier president, didn't really do all that much, wasn't all that significant. Theodore Roosevelt, actually a B tier, or, yeah, I mean, is he an A tier or is he a B tier? I'm struggling with that. Now, I'd say he's an A tier because he tried to preserve America's natural beauty. He was somebody who cared about the American people. He tried his best to break up great monopolies through trust busting, And he was somebody who, just like William McKinley, oversaw the United States' entry to the world stage as a major power. So he's up there. Now, oh boy, this is where it gets controversial. Donald Trump. Where shall I put him? Now, you could blame him for what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. You could say that he didn't take enough action. Again, he's not entirely to blame for it, but also that doesn't mean that he's the type of person who could have done nothing. I mean, he could have at least shown moral leadership. And of course, there's the Capitol insurrection. If he comes back and he actually shows more of what he promised in 2016, to be a guy of the people, to support the little guy, to like push for American workers, then he'd definitely move up. But as right now, I think he's a D tier. Because many people ended up being disappointed by him. Many people ended up being very thrilled by him. So you could say he's a C tier, but just because his presidency didn't really go well. And only history can ultimately judge him, but as right now, I think he's a D. And Harry Truman, we're now getting to the last 5 presidents, has been a long video so far. Harry Truman, I would say, is either a B or an A tier president, but I believe he's a B tier. He was overall a solid guy, made the difficult decision to drop the bombs over Japan, and I do like him. I mean, he was a nice guy, even though his presidency was not too significant, it also wasn't insignificant. And, of course, we all know the very famous picture of newspapers having already printed articles of his opponent winning the 1948 election, and Truman ended up pulling it off. Now, this little guy here, John Tyler, I believe John Tyler, he's a C tier. I mean, he tried to annex Texas, which is good, but he also was very different from the way how many people believed he would be. I mean, he stabbed his own party in the back and even vetoed them on one of the most important issues. So, I have a hard time placing him any higher than C. And of course, presidents shouldn't just be loyal to their party, but he was elected as a Whig, and he acted as a Democrat, and that's just not something anybody would like to see. Martin Van Buren, where does he go? Well, I'd say Martin Van Buren is probably, you could say he's an F tier, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and put him in the D tier. He did not want to annex Texas. He was kind of a coward in that way, and also the economy wasn't doing too well under him. And now we get to the last 2 presidents, George Washington and Woodrow Wilson. Now, we'll do the greatest at last, but now we go with Woodrow Wilson, who in my eyes is an F-tier president. He passed many laws that completely disregarded the First Amendment. He gave a shit about free speech. He was extremely racist, even helped create the second KKK when he displayed a movie called The Birth of a Nation in the White House, which was a white supremacist movie, and it was just the worst president you could think of. He signed prohibition into law, and if it wasn't for James Buchanan literally causing the nation to fall apart, Woodrow Wilson would be the worst president in U.S. history. So, Buchanan's worst, but Wilson is a close second. And now we get to my favorite president. The man, the myth, the legend, the father of our nation, George Washington. And he's undoubtedly an S-tier president. He was first in war and first in peace. He built this nation. Everything that we think about America today, all of its government institutions, it's because of George Washington. Maybe that's a bit overstated, but just like Calvin Coolidge after him, he believed that his own power should be limited. He could have had anything he wanted. They wanted to make him king. He refused. He decided to step down after 2 terms, setting a tradition that would only be broken by Franklin D. Roosevelt down there. Not nice, but again, I explained him earlier on. I believe George Washington is the greatest president in American history. And lots of credit needs to be given for everything that he did. He's a great American hero. And he deserves the amount of mutual respect and love that he's getting. He is really the type of person you'd want to see in there always and ever. And yeah, George Washington, my boy. Now, I believe that's it with this video. It really took pretty long. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If not, please let me know in the comment section down below. Give the video a thumbs up if you did like it. And yeah, I hope to see you next time. I will do a big video on the Virginia gubernatorial election. And as of right now, I really wish you guys have a nice Saturday. And Max out. Goodbye.